When did you decide family law?
The more I did, the more I liked it. It's an area of law that suited my personality. So yeah, it chose me.
How did you tightrope walk when you didn't agree?
All three of us very respectful people. It's good communication. We're all, again, nature of the profession, really good at developing arguments as to why something should or shouldn't be. I really like the management and there's a problem solving about management that I really enjoyed, and the people factor. I like people. And even now I talk about work now, treat people like people.
You made a decision to step away. Talk me through that. Because from the outside it was relatively abrupt.
It was. So that's why it was abrupt, was because behind the scenes all that was happening that nobody knew.
Have you ever noticed how the smallest nudge from someone we admire can change the course of an entire life? For Simone Pearce, it was her father's suggestion to give debating a go that unknowingly sparked a lifetime of advocacy. From defending classmates in the playground to standing up for the rights of families in the courtroom, and later championing inclusion for people with disabilities, Simone has never shed away from using her voice to challenge systems, shift perceptions, and make a difference. Simone Pearce, thank you so much for coming onto the show.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Take me back. How does someone like yourself get into law or get into that idea of, I want to be a lawyer?
I've always been a talker, and that sounds funny and trite, but I've always been a talker, and I now talk to students about how to speak well and how to do public speaking. And I realised when I was doing that recently, I could tell them that I've been public speaking for almost 50 years, which says a lot about my age, but so a long, long time.
Yeah.
And in high school, my father was the English subject master at my school. I went to a state school, and he very early on said, you should go and do some debating. And he was running the debating. And I said, okay, whatever that is, I'll give that a go. And I did anything. And I started debating, and I just loved it. I loved debating. And when it became uncool, I still loved debating. And did it right through high school and was relatively successful in it. And by the time I got into senior, my father, who was very influential in who I am and what I am, said, you need to be a lawyer. Like, you need to go and study law. And I think he'd had aspirations and didn't, but that wasn't the driving force. And I also have a very innate social justice value that I didn't even identify it as that at the time. I'm just a defender of people. So if I saw something in the playground, I would be a defender of people. And that meant that I found it really interesting to study or to think about the legal aspects, which at times early on, like when you're 17, you don't think about it being legal or law, but the aspects that meant someone might have rights or be defended. So I went and studied law and didn't like studying law particularly, but liked the content. And people said, hang in, the practice is better. And then I got into practice and just loved it.
That innate feeling or that moral compass of doing the right thing for the client or for the person in the playground, as you said, is that innate, or is that something that was your childhood that you saw, or that is that impressed on you by your father?
I'm not certain. There's always that argument, isn't there, of nature versus nurture. And now I watch, and he's coming into this early, my son, who has some of those traits. And I'm not sure whether that's nature or nurture, or whether I can't say. And my mother was pretty influential just in the doing right by people. We had a Catholic upbringing, relatively strong in terms of today's standards, strong Catholic upbringing. I'm not sure whether that added to it, but yeah, so I can't answer that. I feel like it's innate. I feel like it's something that I was born with. So yeah.
And when did you, because there's obviously a varying number of areas of law that you can practice, when did you decide family law specifically would be your niche?
It found me.
Right.
Yes, I do recall saying I wasn't going to do family law early on, although I did as an elective studied at university. And by the time I got into practice proper. So I'd done my articles, old school. So done my articles, and I was in the firm that I ended up being a partner in, and no one else wanted to do it. No one else wanted to do family law. And at the time, Peter, who was the partner who I was working with, he just kept shifting his family law files to me, and the more I did, the more I liked it. It's an area of law that suited my personality. It suited some of my skills, but some of my tendencies. So yeah, it chose me.
How was it as a young woman in the profession?
Daunting. It was overwhelming. It was. I'm probably more resilient than most women. I kind of forget. Sounds funny. I forget I'm a woman sometimes. I just get on and do stuff. But the profession would remind me I was a woman often enough. So it was. It was tough. It was hard. It was hard. You certainly didn't see a pathway forward early on.
I had the pleasure of working for you, not in family law, but within the firm. And my impression was that you were so intimidating and so strong as a leader and as a human, let alone as a woman. Where do you talk about the resiliency and that strength? Where have you had to develop that as you grow? Is that because of all the scars and bruises as you've progressed in the profession, or do you think?
I think that resilience is partially my nature. As a child, and I had a good upbringing, but I think things in my upbringing did sort of contribute to that resilience. I was the eldest of three girls. Mum tells the story that when she had the third one, she had 3 under 3. And I was the eldest, and Mum was sort of left with us. Like Dad was working all the time. So, and they'd both grown up in Brisbane, and they'd moved to Maryborough, and I was born in Maryborough. So the three of us were all born in Maryborough, which at the time was a country town a long way from anywhere. So I think, and I recall my mother struggling and me being her helper. So, and she talks about that now. So early on, I think, those formative years they talk about before 7, which you remember only bits and pieces of. And I remember fondly, but I do remember becoming resilient, I think, in those years. So right early on. And then I again had a good childhood, adolescence, pretty normal. There were friends and not friends. But yeah, becoming a lawyer, I often refer to now that I had traits or I had tendencies, and being a lawyer made those stronger or developed those or brought those out.
Yeah, okay.
So you're being resilient. Often and early in my career, again, Peter would say, you need to get tougher. And I was already pretty tough. And at times there are things in my career I did that were because I have either a too big a heart or I'm not tough enough. I wasn't tough enough. But yeah, my resilience and my strength or intimidation, you call it. When people talk about me being intimidating, I actually get surprised still. Like, what are you talking about? And some late in my career, someone called me formidable, and I'm thinking, what are you talking about?
I'm glad I'm not the only one in the room.
And that person went on to be a judge, so he was pretty formidable himself. So I actually let that defender take over. That's what makes me intimidating or formidable, is the defender, I'm going to make this happen. I just live that. It's such a strong value that I forget what I look like, or it doesn't matter what I look like, because it's about achieving that purpose for my client or for my children or for whoever it is that I've decided to help.
Now, the firm you were doing all your career at, one of the longest standing on the Sunshine Coast, and you're the only female partner that's ever been through those doors. How do you reflect on that time, and was it a hard decision to say yes at the start?
It was a really difficult decision to say yes at the start, but for very pragmatic reasons. I was, and should know this, shouldn't I? I was 28-ish.
Wow.
And I had been practicing for 5 years post-admission, so I was young. I wasn't necessarily the obvious next choice to be asked for partner in terms of age or how long people had been there. And the cost of going into partnership was going to be almost double what my house was worth at the time.
Wow.
So it was a very, very big leap that I had to take. And I was very unsure because of the cost, and I wasn't confident I was going to be able to do what needed to be done to be able to meet that debt and maintain that. So it was a massive leap at the time. Reflecting on my time in partnership, and I do say this often, I reflect really fondly on my time in partnership. I really enjoyed it. There were really tough times. There were times where others probably wouldn't have continued doing what I was doing. But for the most part, and I was in partnership then for 15 years, for the most part, I reflect on it really fondly. I developed as a person significantly. I had great mentors. Peter and Alan, who I was in partnership with the entire time, are great human beings who taught me wonderful things. Sometimes Peter's hard to work for and work with, but he's a hard taskmaster and he has the bar really high. And once you reach it, he sets it higher. So it taught me some really good things, and sometimes about how not to work so hard as well. I reflect really fondly, and it was a privilege. It was actually a privilege to be offered a partnership in that firm, and to be asked to step up and see what you can do, and I will forever be grateful for that privilege. It was an honour.
You start working there as a lawyer, and as a partner, you become almost. There's obviously a fair file carry that you have to do, but you're then managing people and staff and all the things. What surprised you within your own scope of skills? What was hard about that, or what do you think came easy for you?
Hard about it. So the first thing, when I first went into partnership, we had 2 offices. We had one at Alexandra Headlands, and I'd been working in Nambour, and that was great. And I love people, and there were lots of people in the firm, and I like to think I'm a kind of natural leader, but management and leadership are different. So I'd really enjoyed that. And then when I went into partnership, the task was to man and manage the Alex office. I was 28.
Yeah, right.
Just brought into partnership with a debt that was almost double the value of my home, and I'd been married. I'm trying to think. I'd probably been married. I'm married young, so I was married 3 or 4 years at that time, and then I was running an arm or a satellite office of our firm, effectively on my own. So the hardest thing was the isolation. I felt incredibly isolated from the support of Peter and Alan. We had maybe 3 or 4 staff down there.
Right.
So there were not a lot of people. And I suddenly realised the buck stopped with me, and I had no one to ask anything. When I went to turn to ask someone, there was no one else there. So that was difficult. I found that environment very, very challenging. What was the good? The good, or what did surprise me? It surprised me, or I embraced the extent to which then I actually really enjoyed management. I really liked the management, and there's a problem solving about management that I really enjoyed, and the people factor. I like people, and even now I talk about work now. Treat people like people, and I enjoyed that. And legal fraternity, I don't think necessarily, certainly at the time, I don't think did that well. So I felt like I was a little bit. It was a bit of a new way of doing law, was to manage people and treat people like people. Yeah. So that.
How long were you in the satellite office before you moved back to Nambour?
I can't. Again, I'm not a memory. You said the answers were in my head, and they're not. Maybe it was only 2 or 3 years.
Right.
And I think, 1, because of the isolation, I wasn't dealing with it very well. 2, we realised that as a family lawyer, people would come and see me no matter where I was. We didn't have to be at Alex. And so it actually became a commercial decision. We looked at it. And again, one of the things I feel like I contributed, we had a look and said, we don't need another office. We don't need the overheads. We can do this all together. And it was a great turning point for us, for the three of us at the time. We then built a new building in Nambour and didn't look back. Like, we actually didn't notice when we shut the Alex office in terms of the performance of the firm. So it was, so that was a good decision.
And from what I'm told, you were in charge of the design of the of the new premises, and I think without sort of knowing, I took a lot of that, and to the point where you designed the font of the firm, and I took a lot of, without, yes, is it not something that I was consciously aware of, but I liked that it meant everything to you in every detail, where the boardrooms were placed, where the reception was placed, where everyone's offices were placed, was inspiring, and I brought that into this place to go, okay, there's 1,000 decisions when you fit out a place, and if it's consciously decided on, it means something.
It does, and you're invested in it. Yeah, I remember, and it sounds funny, but it's an example. I went and bought the teacups.
I love that.
I said, I went to Maya and picked out the teacups. I said,
these are the teacups.
These are the teacups we're having. Artwork, and look, some of it I look back at now and go, oh, I could have done that better. But to your point, I was incredibly invested. It was enjoyable. And that's not to say Peter and Alan didn't have a lot of a say at the time. There are times where we potentially clashed over things, but I think I stood up for lots of things. I was invested. I was incredibly invested. It was my entire life.
Well, how did you manage, because as you said, they're incredibly good humans. How did you tightrope walk when you were at cross purposes, when you didn't agree on management issues or firm direction or firm matters of the firm? And I imagine that they're both all three of you are quite opinionated, and by virtue of your profession, you dig your heels in. How do you get through that and still the next week work well and continue?
I think that we probably had the right similarities. All three of us very respectful people. It's good communication. It's talk lots, listen lots. At times go away, think about it, come back. I heard you said this. This is why I don't agree. We're all, again, nature of the profession, really good at developing arguments as to why something should or shouldn't be. And then I don't ever remember a time that I think that we were at such cross purposes we couldn't get to the outcome by agreement. And it might have taken a couple of weeks sometimes. We might have had to have kept coming back to things. And this is on all sorts of things from
everything.
And there were plenty of times we disagreed, and, I'd be going, and come back the next day and potentially, and in the nature of the profession, you might not see each other for another 3 or 4 days.
Yeah.
And then communicate about it again. It's communication. And I still, again, in every sphere of my life.
Every relationship.
Comes back to that.
Yeah, fair. That's great advice. Hey guys, just popping in with a gentle reminder. If you're enjoying this episode, we'd love it if you'd give it a like, hit subscribe, and leave a comment with your thoughts. It's free and it really helps us grow and continue to share these stories that matter. Cheers. I was there when you were running a very successful family law practice within the firm, and you had so many wonderful family lawyers underneath and working for you who are now gone on to amazing things as well. But you made a decision to step away. Talk me through that. Because from the outside, it was relatively abrupt.
It was. I consider myself to have been relatively successful at family law in that I enjoyed it and I was good at it. I probably felt like I was hitting my peak at about that time. And I was, I'm going to say, 40-ish, early 40s. So I probably was hitting my peak. And at the time...
But if you wanted it, it could have been another 20 years. Right?
Yeah, absolutely. And there was talk at the time. And my own thoughts, just in career terms, when I first started law, I should go back and say, my aspiration was I was going to the bar. So I was going to be a barrister. And I always had aspirations still. Should I go to the bar? Should I go to the bar? And in family law, again, you have a great opportunity to do a lot of advocacy as a family lawyer because you can do interim hearings and lots of things. And again, the firm was one that promoted that. If you wanted to do the advocacy yourself, you could. So I enjoyed it. So there was thought at the time, where I'm at, I need to make some decisions. Do I go to the bar? Do I stay here and be a partner? And I ultimately decided I would stay and be a partner because it was safe, it was secure, it was what I knew. I was getting plenty of advocacy. At the time, I thought about aspirations of, would I, federal magistracy had come in. I thought, should I start to aim for something like that? And that's probably selfishly because I think those people are revered and I liked that part of the job. I liked it that people thought you were clever and that you did a good job. But I had 2 children, and at the time that I left, my eldest was 6 and my youngest was 4. And I'd probably spent, from the time that I'd had my eldest, Grace, from the time she was born, I immediately struggled to balance work and children, immediately. And that's because my values were divided. It's the same value. That is, I'm in this boots and all. That had been the firm, and now I had a child, and then 2 children. So I found it difficult, and I went part-time. And of course, as anyone will tell you, part-time is not part-time. And I struggled on, and it got from the time that I had Grace. Things changed and my perspective changed, my focus changed. I was determined to be a lawyer at the same time as a mother. I was determined no one's going to stop me. I took Grace into a partnership meeting. I think she was 6 weeks old. I was breastfeeding and I'm going, aren't I awesome? This is awesome. I'm at the only female partner in a firm. The only one that's had ever been. My partners are so cool at the time, and they're so accepting of a mother. I'm breastfeeding whilst I sit at a partnership meeting. Like, this is terrific, and it was, but it was difficult to divide your loyalties. And being a partner in a law firm is, if you do it well, it's a 60 to 70 hour week, and that doesn't go with being a parent. And from the time I had Grace, there was another layer to my parenthood, and that was that I knew from the minute she was born that something wasn't right. She had this strange cry when she was born. She was a little bit limp, is the word.
There was nothing picked up
Nothing
in
picked
your pregnancy?
Nope, not in my pregnancy. She was a breech baby, but other than that, nothing picked up in the pregnancy. And so I'd had a C-section, but other than that, nothing. But I just felt there was something not quite right. And I spent, and it didn't consume me early on. I just every now and then I'd go, that doesn't seem to be right. So the milestones were just a little bit behind, and I'd look to watch her try to crawl. She didn't crawl. She dragged herself along. She spoke late and didn't talk like I knew. Well, and it sounds funny, but it was I'm a talker, and my child wasn't talking, and certainly didn't talk like others I knew around me were talking.
At that age?
Yeah, the one 18-month-old. So I knew something was wrong. So I was also trying to have another baby, practice law, be the lawyer who has children and still does it and is amazing. And that was really important to me. I have this bit of feminist streak as well, which I don't think is a secret. So it was, I'm going to do this, but I knew something wasn't quite right. And Grace was 2.5 and she still wasn't talking more than half a dozen words, and she should have had 100 and something. And that was probably the 3rd time back to the paediatrician saying, I'm just not sure that this is right. And they said, look, she's just a late talker. and everything's fine, and let's take her to a speech therapist. So I remember I was pregnant with Jude, my son. I would have the nanny who I'd employed at the time bring Grace into the speech therapist that was in Amber, and I'd meet them at the speech therapist, and I'd sit on the floor, very fat, very pregnant, and she was taught sign language so that it would bring out her communication skills. And she was already signing a little bit or doing her own signs. So at that time, there was something not quite right. And I don't like talking like that now because of now my understanding of disability, which is what Grace ended up having. But something wasn't quite right. So I was trying to battle being a partner in a law firm with partners who were being really understanding, and they wanted it to work as well, but it wasn't working. And it got to a point where I had to step back from family law because I couldn't go to Brisbane 3 or 4 times a week.
Yeah, that's the other thing as well. The area of law is so, it's not as if it is commercial law where you can sit in the office or sit at home and just punch out documents.
No,
you're in court sitting around waiting for hours, right?
And
in Brisbane.
And in Brisbane, or you're in mediations. And a mediation could be going, you start at 8 o'clock in the morning, and at 7 o'clock at night, you're saying, well, we can just get this signed up, so let's start drafting the documents. So that practice is not conducive to what I was trying to do as a parent.
How were you mentally?
How was I then? In a nutshell, terrible. I was torn in my loyalties. I knew I wasn't performing as a lawyer as I should be in terms of the volume I should be doing. I felt like I wasn't succeeding anywhere, and I was incredibly worried about what it was happening with my daughter. I was worried about what that was going to mean. So mentally, I was terrible, just not coping.
How long do you think you endured that space for?
Probably 3 or 4 years while still in practice. So from the time, I had Jude, and then that really ramped it up. And we talk in retrospect, and even Peter and I talk about that's actually when it really changed. So I had a second child, and it happened to coincide with that time where I realised that Grace needed lots of help.
Yep.
So she was 2.5. And so, it was about 4 years. So I battled, and I was really part of it was my own fault or ego. I was determined I was going to do this. I was going to be a lawyer, and I was going to stay a lawyer, and I was going to be a mother of 2 children. I was going to show people how it was done. But it just got harder and harder. And so Grace then went to school. She went to prep, and when she started prep, and I'd actually asked them, is she ready? Do you think she's ready? And they said, oh, yeah, she's fine. And then she started prep, and almost immediately they said, oh, she'll need to repeat. What are you talking about? She needs to repeat. So as I went and did all of the research around whether or not a child should repeat, and not knowing at all what was happening with Grace, what the issue was, asking people, going back to the paediatrician, saying there's something not right. Still nothing. They're testing her for autism. They're doing all the tests. Doesn't come up. And so I refused to allow her to repeat prep because I said, from what I can see, there's just no basis and no reason for her to. And then she got into year 1, and almost immediately they said the same thing. And I said, oh, you know what? Let's do it, because then you'll stop. You can't do it again. I give up. I surrender. I'm saying all the studies say this is not the right thing to do. But there's a condition that she repeats, and that is I want her tested for everything. I want to find out what's going on because something's going on. And at the time, to her credit, her teacher, I said, hearing, eyes, we're doing it all. And her teacher said, have an OT look at her. Because she knew too, there was just something not quite right. So, and I'm sure we'll get into that more, but by the September, when we had to make the decision she was repeating, and then we had the OT see her, the OT came back to me and said, you need to go and have her tested for her genetics, chromosome tests. At which point, the minute she said that to me, and I'll get teary, the minute she said it, I knew. And I'd actually read 2 years before in a Queensland magazine with the Courier Mail, I'd read about a condition. It was called cry de chat. And I read it, and I'm thinking, gee, that sounds very similar to some of Grace's presentations, but Grace can walk and Grace can talk, and I'm pretty sure you can't have a partial chromosomal deficiency, so that can't be it. And when the OT said that to me, I went and Googled Ida Shat and I hadn't Googled it before, and suddenly up came, and she had all bar, I think, one of the symptoms for the condition. And at that minute, I knew that's what she had.
Mm.
And I actually went and spoke to Peter the next day, and he'd known of my journey of the Grace, just something wasn't quite right and the distress it was causing me. And once we knew that, we hadn't had the test or anything at that point to confirm it, but our conversation was, you can't stay. If it's not this, it's something, and you're not going to stop till you find it, which is right. I would not have stopped till I found it. He said, you can't keep doing this. And he was right. And I knew I couldn't keep doing it.
Mm.
But it was, for me, it was almost because of whether it's my ego or what it was, or my determination to stay a lawyer, it was the permission I needed. I needed permission to leave.
Mm.
I needed permission to stop. And I loved it. I loved being a lawyer, but there were really hard things about it that I don't miss. And that gave me permission to go and do what my heart was telling me I had to do, which was be there for her. So that's why it was abrupt, was because behind the scenes, all that was happening that nobody knew. And I was being I'm going to be a lawyer and aren't I tough? And then when it suddenly all came to it, it was, I've got to go.
What was the feeling when you made that decision?
It was a mix of fear and relief. But a little bit sad. There was some grief. But there was grief all over the place.
Sure.
What grief was greater? The grief that I had a child with a disability, or that I knew had a disability. That is a grief. Or was it the grief of losing? And it wasn't losing a place in a partnership. It wasn't losing that. It was I had developed this practice of identifying myself as I'm Simone the lawyer. I was a lawyer, and I was a lawyer first, and I had lost that. So it was grief, probably, was my primary feeling.
Would you have done anything differently in the issue about the detachment to you identifying yourself as the lawyer first? But
I'm not sure. I wasn't capable of it back then. I wasn't capable of it. So I could say it would have been nice. And I give advice to students now and say, don't identify yourself as a lawyer. You are much more than that. So I think I know the lesson, and I know that it wasn't healthy, but I wasn't capable of that. I can't see myself having ever done anything other than that.
With the tools you had at the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a wonderful answer. So then take me to the path. So then you get the genetic tests with Grace.
Yeah. So I am very determined. And once I set my sights on something, and it's part of that defender, okay, I'm going to fix this. I'm going to find it. If that's what she's got, let's find it. Let's get it diagnosed, and we're going to deal with this. So I went to the GP the next day, said, I need a chromosome test today. They said, well, that's not going to happen. Referred to a paediatrician, and paediatrician 3 weeks later, and that was fast. The whole while, sort of this incredible anxiety about what does this mean? And then, and because, of course, Grace had so many symptoms of the condition then, such as bedwetting and chewing and swallowing and eating difficulties. And I read more and more about it. So I was then incredibly worried about what this would mean. So it was a really stressful time. Went to the paediatrician, said, and I actually had friends at the time who were paediatricians through school, the parents at school, and they said, you can get a particular test that then they likened it to, we used to be able to find a book in the library. We can now find a line on a page on a book in a library. So go and ask for that. I don't remember what it was called, but it was that test. And the paediatrician who had treated Grace since birth said it's not Ida Shat because that presents with an intellectual impairment. That's not Grace. She doesn't have Ida Shat. And I said, well, lucky for you, you and I don't have to have this argument because a blood test will tell us and then we can move on. So he said, okay, I'll give her a blood test. And he also wanted me to do an MRI for a stroke that she might have had in vitro. And I said, that's okay. I'm not doing the MRI until we've had the blood test results. Went and did the blood test. 6 weeks it took for it to come back. And he phoned me at work and he said, I'm phoning to tell you that you've taught me the first lesson of pediatrics, and that is that mummy's always right. I said, well, thanks. I didn't do this to be right. I did this because I really want to help my child. And he didn't kind of apologise, but it was kind of an apology. And he said, she has Creutzfeldt syndrome. And he said there's a part of the chromosome that is missing, and it can vary, and she hasn't lost all of the parts that would leave you not walking and not talking. But she's lost enough that she has the syndrome, and come on in and we'll work out what to do next.
How old was she then?
She was 6.5.
Is she in a place where is she able to understand what, like the condition that she has, or that there is a diagnosis here and what it means for her?
At the time, no.
Right.
No. So, and I didn't tell her. We didn't tell her, and I can't remember exactly when it was, but it was years. It was maybe 3 or 4 years later, maybe even longer. She might have been 10 or 11 by the time we told her. One, there was no need to. We just were getting on with, and let's just do, and we go and see doctors and we go and see OTs and we do stuff. And my approach was, and we're going to play lots of sport. And we were already playing sport, but we're going to play lots of sport. And let's get on with it. And we didn't tell her. And when we ended up telling her, we'd been grappling with how we're going to tell her because she needs to know at some point. And it was, she must have been grade 4 or 5. And there came an opportunity where she actually asked about somebody with Down's syndrome on the television. Or I think Jude might have asked something about that and why does that person look different? And I explained it. And Grace actually said, Mum, is that something like I have? And that opened the conversation. So she's a cluey kid, was a cluey kid. But yeah, it wasn't something.
Was because she's just turned 18.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. She's still cluey. She's now just an adult.
How has the experience having Grace been for you in terms of how you've seen the world as an advocate for disability?
Grace changed my life completely, changed how I saw the world completely. I can honestly say that I was a perfectionist and everything's perfect and everything's in its place and that's what everyone needs to be. And Grace immediately, and I with some embarrassment, but I think it's understandable and I think it will resonate with some. I went through my child's broken. But this child's broken. If this child was not a person, I'd take her back and I'd exchange her for someone that's not broken, which is a terrible thought, and I would never take her back and loved her dearly. But that's the feeling you have, is that she's broken. But then I started to learn about disability and what disability was and how our society is structured to almost make me feel like I felt that things had to be perfect and that that you are broken if you have a disability.
Like you said earlier, that there was something not right, and just that the vernacular of that.
Which, as I said, I dislike that now. I
Yeah.
dislike that terminology that something's not right. And I don't talk in terms of normal because I very quickly learned that there is no normal. And there's some parts of the world of talk about disability that I don't necessarily buy into, and that is let's look for the abilities and Let's look for the things they can do, because in part I almost feel like that's patronising. But I learned firstly that it's the world that creates barriers for people, and that people are people, and we should take each person as they are. And that's not a matter of let's celebrate what they're good at, or like let's just take people as they are, and treat them as they are. And that's a different outlook, I think. And then I learned about that the society creates rules that are barriers. And this was before I then went into academia and started learning more about what that was about, start using that terminology when we get to that social model of disability. But I started learning that if it weren't for some of the rules that we have in place, people with disability wouldn't have the difficulties that they have. And not only rules, but attitudes. If we didn't have the attitudes we had, then they won't have the barriers that they have. And that we can change rules, we can change attitudes. And again, that probably, I feel like in my life, this was all part of someone's plan. I'm not a rule breaker, but I'm a rule questioner. I don't like breaking rules, and I'm have been a lawyer, and I don't like breaking rules. But if I think a rule is dumb or doesn't work, I will immediately say that's a dumb rule. Why is that? Why are we doing that? And it's the same attitude about disability and the rules or the structures we put in place. Why are we doing that? Why are we treating people like that? Why are we not treating that person like we would treat any other person? So it kind of, again, just suited my personality, or the universe matched me with this child to see the world in that way. And that's now how I see the world in all things. And I'm always looking for how are we treating people, and how am I treating a person? And if they're behaving in a particular way, there's probably a really good reason they're behaving in that way. And what's my place in this? My place in how this is happening. And that comes to, very formal things about social model of disability and adjustments, and how do we make adjustments. But when you look at the world through those eyes, and then it does become about what can we do? What can we do to make sure that that person has the same sort of life as any other person? You look at the world very differently.
There's a competing interest, though, in the sense that you've got this model of treating them differently to provide the support that they, quote unquote, need, versus treating them the same and having the equality position. How do you manage through those?
Yeah, and that's a really good question, and I can jump to some formal law about that because it sort of explains it. But I learnt the law after I intuitively felt how to do that. So there's a premise in law of substantive equality, and that is different from formal equality, where we treat somebody the same. So a man and a woman going for a job, formal equality, we should treat them, and this is actually subject to a lot of other things, but we should treat them the same. And we should measure them for the purposes of the criteria of the job the same way. That's formal equality. But substantive equality means that there are times where you will treat someone the same because it's appropriate to do so, but then there are times you will make an adjustment, and that adjustment means that that person is going to be treated on the same basis, and that the law talks about that same basis. Human rights talks about equal basis, and that's not quite right either, because equality has that it connotes equal, exactly the same. But you treat people the same when it's appropriate, and you then make adjustments so that they are treated on the same basis when that's appropriate.
Right.
And it's a mix. And it is comparable to, and I have, if it hadn't been for disability, I'm sure it would have ended up in women's issues, because that example I used about a man and a woman, there are times where substantive equality principles should apply to women and women in the workforce, because And there are men who are primary carer who would apply to, but there are times where primary responsibility that a mother has for their children is greater than that of the man she's competing for a job for. And substantive equality would say make adjustments where appropriate so that the opportunity and or she's treated on the same basis, but not exactly the same. And it's the same with disability. So there are times that it's exactly the same, and there are some disabilities where you would treat a person exactly the same, but then there are others where you make adjustments.
Your nature, or I always said it, you're formidable. Let's call it that. Let's agree with that. How do you instill those characteristics to Grace as she is growing in adolescence and being able to say, yes, you are prejudiced, or you're not prejudiced, but you do have this difference to you that, for better or for worse, and maybe objectively makes it harder in areas of life through no fault of your own or anyone's. But you still want to instill these aspects of that you can achieve anything you want and you can shoot for the stars and go after it. Like, you know, an incredible mother as an example for her. Have you at that point in time through adolescence, are you working on that? Are you thinking, how am I going to?
Yeah, look, I'm probably not the best parent really. I'm not so conscious about it, but it's all planned out. I do think very carefully. Sometimes there are times where it's, well, we're just going to do that. We're going to do it. You're going to do it, and it's not fair, but you're going to do it anyway. And she is formidable. She is determined. She is, she's amazing. And there are times in her adolescence where I've said, there's nothing I can do about that. That's the way that it is, and you won't be able to do that. And she'll say, I hate this disability. I said, yep, I get it. And, examples. I'll start with probably the most recent, most difficult, and that is Grace can't drive. So she went to try to get a driver's license, and I knew that she was going to have difficulty driving because of a whole combination of things about her disability. Grace didn't think that was going to be a problem. She thought she was going to be able to drive. And we then went through the tests, and they said that it's highly unlikely that Grace will drive safely. So she won't be able to get a driver's license and survive or not cause difficulties. And that was an incredibly difficult thing for her to understand. And at times, I'm sure she still doesn't understand it. And she'll say, less than 1% of the population can't drive. And
that's such a rite to passage as well, right?
And it's an independence.
Yeah.
It gives you independence, and she doesn't have that independence. And it makes me incredibly sad for her, and I second-guess myself all the time, did I do the right thing getting that report? But I did, because I saved her or somebody else's life, I'm sure. But that is a very, very difficult thing. It doesn't matter how hard we try. She won't be able to drive safely. But on the other hand, there are then times like she is a triathlete, and she became a triathlete by accident, really, but she's become a triathlete. And we went to an event earlier this year that was a super sprint event, and there was no para division. And we definitely don't have the time in this podcast to talk about para sport, but there's no para division. And she'd been in the sport long enough, and her brother was going to this super sprint, and she had enough experience that I asked, do you think we could enter her in this? And triathlon is difficult for a para athlete if you compete in the mainstream because it's drafting, and para athletes don't draft. So that was dangerous. Although she'd managed to be draft legal, she'd managed to ride enough and be trained enough to be draft legal. So Triathlon, to their credit, said, yep, she can come along and let's do what we need to do to make this something she can do. And very long story short, over 3 or 4 days of racing in the juniors, which is 16 to 19s, and Grace, I said to her at one stage, how are you going to go drafting out there with these girls? Like, are you going to have a go
It's
out
effectively
there?
riding really close with other riders, which
Yep.
spatial awareness is probably a huge component of the reason why she
Yeah.
can't drive a car.
That's right. And impulse control is another
Right.
problem. And I said, how are you going to go drafting? You know, you're going to have a go at this? She said, yeah, of course I am. I went, rightio, me holding my breath, hoping she doesn't come off this thing out there. And she went out in the race that probably mattered out of a series of races. And she'd come last in a couple of the little things they had. And she went out in this race that mattered, and she got on the bike and she rode out, and takes a lot longer to get on the bike than anybody else, and she's finally in, and she mowed down the pack. And there were leaders out the front, the elites, super elites, but she mowed down the pack. She went to the front of the pack, and then she dragged the pack around 2 laps, which again brings tears to my eyes because she's formidable. She is. It did not cross her mind that she couldn't do it, not at all. And she ended up making the A final of this Australian super sprint series, which was just extraordinary. It actually blew us all away that she did what she did, and it purely and simply determination. And it's not determination on that day, or not purely and simply determination and belief in herself. And it's not just that day; it's determination and belief in herself every single time she goes out to train. She says she doesn't ever think she can't do something. Never crosses her mind.
Well, we might have to get you back on to talk about parasport because what you're failing to say very humbly is that she represented Australia at the Paralympics at 17 years of age, and will be appropriately aged for LA and for Brisbane, which will be incredible.
Yeah.
And also a testament to you and your ridiculous statement to say, I'll use your word dumb statement, to say that you're not a great mother, because for a kid who does 3 sports professionally, full time, without a license, you are there. And even this morning you said you're up at 4 a.m. and riding with her and running with her. Like the amount of dedication and how close you guys must be is such a testament.
Thanks. Yeah. And it's actually a pleasure and a privilege to have been her mum, honestly, and to continue to be her mum, obviously. She has taught me so much, and it's funny. Her name Grace, and at the time I didn't know, but her name Grace means gift from God, and she has been. She has been. Every run I've had to go on, every ride we've done, every step we've taken, it really has been a privilege. And yeah, we are close. And it's funny, my son and I are more similar, I think, in lots of ways. So Grace and I are different, but yeah, there's a connection. And it's things like, and here's an example of it. Before she went to Paris, and we all know that Paris didn't go as we wanted it to go because she was disqualified. And I knew, I had this feeling, this dread that something was going to go wrong. I just knew something was going to go wrong. And someone asked me beforehand what it was, and I said, I fear she's going to get disqualified, that something will go wrong. And after she was disqualified, when it happened, when the incident happened, I thought, there it is, that's it. And just knowing her so well, I knew that she was going to have trouble and that something like that would happen. And she went back into the village and she said, I'm not thinking about it. She went and had a good time. And we were in Paris and we were leaving, and I knew she was getting on the plane, and I had this feeling that something wasn't right. I had this feeling that she needed help. And it was overnight, and most of the night I lay awake going, something's not right. And she'd had, and had never had them before, had a series of panic attacks as she was leaving Paris and having to leave because she'd blocked out, of course, what had happened and tried not to deal with it. But I knew what was happening, and I knew that there was something wrong. And there's just a connection that you have when you work. Yeah, you you live so closely with someone and you are so connected in everything that they do. Can't help it, I suppose.
How has it been with Jude, your son? With Grace having, I guess, quote unquote, attention and a lot of time of your time. How do you manage that with youngest with Jude?
I am really conscious of that, and I think there's been times over the years where I could recognise that he was seeking attention, because even though she wasn't getting good attention, it was still attention. So I would try to balance it up. And we've probably been fortunate. He's a triathlete as well. He's a talented athlete as well. He's got a couple of other talents. So he's a great debater. He's quite a good performer. So I made sure that I invested and celebrated his talents. And there's a couple of things. He's been on the journey. I think he would not be the person he's becoming without having been Grace's sibling. Yeah. He's learnt lots about disability and people and treating people, and I think it's been a good upbringing for him. He has to do lots of things that siblings don't ordinarily have to do. He has an understanding of her.
The empathy.
It's something that's it's actually beautiful to watch when you see it happening. And he's not always like that. They have plenty of times where they're swearing and carrying on and throwing things at each other. But in some respects, he treats her just as he would treat any other sibling, and kicks her as he walks past her. So he's been very closely involved in the journey, and lots of the runs we went on, he would be there, and lots of the rides we went on when he was old enough, he would be there. And by now, he has ridden and run with her more than I have.
Okay.
Because they got too fast for me. So we could celebrate his talents, and we could celebrate the good person that he was becoming, and we could whip him into line and tell him you need to be a better person than that. And he's a talker, and we've had lots of conversations about parasport and how sometimes Grace's pathway seems easier than his, and she gets a national medal just for turning up, and I have to train for 3 years and wait and go through all of these processes to get a national medal. It's not fair. So we've had lots of conversations about what fairness means, and whether or not Grace's pathway was easier, and or what matters about medals, why do medals matter? It's not about that. So lots of...
What an environment to grow up in.
Well, hopefully it's a good one. But we don't measure ourselves by medals. It's there are different measures, and it's not even PBs. It's about a lot of other things. And to be fair, the sport of triathlon teaches you lots of those lessons as well. It's a great sport for both my kids to be involved in because of those lessons.
Hey guys, before we keep going, a quick reminder, if something in today's chat has landed with you, please like the episode, subscribe to the show, and share your thoughts in the comments. It helps us more than you know, and it means we can keep inviting voices that inspire. All right, let's get back into it. You're now in academia at the uni. What has that taught you in terms of educating the up-and-coming lawyers?
Oh, goodness me. Another podcast, Richard. It has taught me, so many things. So let's start with the obvious. Our law degrees do not appropriately prepare people to be lawyers. That's taught me that. There's a great opportunity to be a good teacher of law through a practice lens. I really enjoy teaching students knowing the practice lens that I bring. And I'm actually probably not particularly good at academia. I'm not very good at theory. So perhaps they sometimes miss out on that from me, but they get it from others. But
you bring that extensive practicality and what it's like to work in a firm.
And what they need to be able to do. What are you, I teach professional conduct now, and I do it through the lens of what do you need to be able to do to be a really good lawyer? And so teach it through that lens, which is fun to teach like that. And at times students don't like it because of some of the things that I do in that deep ending them. So you're on your own and you've got to find that. But a lot of students come back to me 2 or 3 years later and say, thank you for that, because it was it made going into practice easier, doing some of the things that we did. So that's good. I find academia hard because I don't like dumb rules. I don't fit into a box. So I challenge. I don't that institutional you must and do things this way when I think that's actually not really either fair or good or so. Those things, our academia and the structure around it is not necessarily optimal, I don't think. So I struggle with that. But compared to practicing law is pretty hard. I learned pretty quickly that practicing law was a very difficult thing to have chosen to do. Academia is not. It doesn't have those difficulties. But I probably struggle more about those rules and the structures and the, you must do things a particular way, and
just because it's the way it's done.
That's right. And doing a PhD was an example of that. So I did my PhD and I wanted to do a particular thing and I wanted to write particular things and saying, well, you just have to do this. We just have to go back and do that again. I said, why? Why do I have to do that? Like, that doesn't make any sense. Because that's the way it's done. Doesn't seem like a good idea to me. So I struggle. But again, I think I have learned that that's my personality. I challenge rules, particularly, or the man. I challenge the man, and it's
the institution.
The institution. That's, if it's wrong, then someone should stand up to it. And I teach like that. I teach my students, ask when you're reading about law or you're reading a case, ask why. Why did they make that decision? Or why does the legislation say that? What purpose does it serve? And potentially, at a time, there'll be an opportunity for a client to use that curiosity to argue around or through or a change for legislation or rules or law. I often tell them, some of you will be judges, some of you will be politicians and make this law, and some of you will just challenge it, or have to use it to the best of your ability for certain purposes. And it's always about asking why. Why is it like this?
Curiosity around it. I love that. Also really like the fact that it's in my mind, such a full circle for you, in the sense of you've developed an incredible career in law as someone who stands up for the minority or stands up for the defense, or like to be at someone's defense, to then be in the position of being Grace's mum and being the chief defender. And now you're on so many boards and volunteer your time on so many important aspects and elements of the community. I just find it remarkable that it's such a, as you said, it's almost as if you were ready-made for this advocacy role in this element of the community.
Yeah, and it's when you talk like that, I kind of get a little bit embarrassed, and because I forget that I don't step back but that I actually
and shake the tree and say, this isn't.
Yeah.
Why is this the way? Why can't we do it a different way?
Yeah, I do too many things, to be fair. But I just get on with doing things, and people will often say, "Oh, you need to stop. You need to stop. You do too much. You need to slow down." And my answer is, I actually feel like I can't get enough done. My anxiety comes from not getting enough done. I need to do more. I need to do more.
I can operate on 4 hours.
Yeah, that's right. I do. I need to do more.
Yeah.
So I actually don't. I very, very seldom do I stand back and go, "Wow, have a look at all of this." It's more of, I've got to get that done and I need to do that. And, I was just saying to my partner this morning, I'm doing this work with some parents of other children with disability in sport, and a couple of them had emailed me over the weekend about things that we're doing. And I said, I really need to get onto that. I need to do that. And I need to answer that, and I need to pursue that because something needs to be done there. And that's actually been all I've been thinking about for the last couple of days since I read the email. So it's and sometimes I can't do what I wish I could do. I don't have the resources. I don't have the capacity. But yeah, it's just seeing something that needs to be done and thinking I might be able to do it. Often something that's not right, I might be able to change that or influence that. And as my life and career has gone on, getting smarter about how to make that happen. Early on, it might have been stamping my fist on the table and we're going to do this. Now I'm a bit smarter about that. But you're trying to find ways of making change that, in my view, should be made. So, yeah, getting on doing it.
It's really inspiring. Thank you so much for your time.
It's okay.
I might have to get you back and talk and open that envelope of parasport and society's views and prejudices against people with disabilities. But I'm interested in the final questions that we always ask.
Yes.
What's your view of success? What does success mean to you? Quick fire, Simone.
Oh, quick fire.
Come on.
Success for me is it still probably is all my ducks in a row. It's contentment. It's sometimes it's having dinner on the table and everybody liking dinner. Sometimes that's success.
Yeah, fair.
It's making a difference. It's making a change. It's doing it, as I just said, it's seeing something that's not right, making it right, or what I think is right, or making a change, and having others. I feel most successful when others go, "Oh, I get it. I get it." That's success for me.
What does happiness mean to you?
I can honestly say quick fire is I'm not sure. I'm not sure yet. Happiness, I am happiest by doing what I'm talking about, like making a difference, doing. And people talk about that, you need to stop and you need to slow down. And my answer is I actually don't, and I don't know how to do that, and I don't really want to do that. I'm happiest trying to make a difference, and I'm happiest getting on doing things that need to get done. And
we've alluded to it a little bit, but what's your normal morning routine?
My normal morning routine is a relatively early morning, somewhere between 4 a.m. and 5 a.m. out of bed, straight up downstairs, food on in the toaster for the kids for pre-training snack, open their doors. Good morning. It's time. Good morning. It's time. Are you with me? Are you with me? I'm back upstairs to put on whatever exercise gear I'm going to wear for whatever I'm doing whilst they're exercising, and then off to either swimming, running or riding. That's my morning routine.
Fantastic. And in triathlon, it's a 7-day.
It is every day.
It's 14 to 16 sessions a week.
That's it. Every day.
A piece of advice you'd give to yourself when you were younger, maybe when you first started working?
It'll be okay. And
finally, a guest that you think we should have on the show.
Oh, wow. Quick fire. What's the criteria?
Well, if it's we're talking about continuing the discussion in Paralympic sport or parasport, is there someone in that industry that is influential other than yourself?
Yeah, look, and it's actually sounds corny and obvious, but Dylan Alcott is an amazing person. The way he sees the world is something that I align with and revere. He's extraordinary. And Grace is part of an academy that he set up for elite para athletes coming through or athletes with disability coming through, and has given her some opportunities. And I've been able to meet him, and she's met him, and talked to him. And they actually asked of Grace and I, if there was somebody in the world you wanted to talk to, who would it be? And mine was him. And I haven't yet had the opportunity of a one-on-one with Dylan. But yeah, I think he is doing amazing things. He has made a difference in a world where no other has made a difference like he's making. And yeah, what he's been able to achieve is extraordinary, and I think he's going to do even more. So yeah, a bit corny, but it's true.
For a reason.
Yeah, it's really true.
Yeah. Simone Pearce, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you, Richard. It has been a pleasure. I'm sorry for all the answers that weren't quite your standard.
That was fantastic. That was another episode of the Success Times Happiness podcast. Next time you're thinking about the Olympics or the Paralympics, think about our show and turn to the person next to you and let them know all about it. A huge thanks to Simone Pearce for generously sharing her journey with us today. If you enjoyed this conversation, we'd love you to support the podcast by liking, leaving a comment, or giving us a rating wherever you're listening right now. It's the only way we're growing. Your engagement helps us continue bringing meaningful stories to life. Until next time, peace.